This is the Art of Weird Tales panel. Mike Tierney, who is the author of the Art Chronology of Robert E. Howard. What was it, 100 Years Art Chronology?
Can you speak closer to the microphone? Thank you.
He's the author of the Robert E. Howard Art Chronology set that's just come out. And here we have David Spurlock. He's the owner of Vanguard Publishers. He's published a number of books on Frazetta and other artists, and he did a book on Margaret Brundage a couple of years ago. And I'm Dennis McHaney. I'm the author of Robert E. Howard and Weird Tales. And we're going to show you a lot of pictures. And I believe David wanted to say something to start out with.
Sorcery! Sword-wielding warriors battling sorcerers and horrors most vile. But all sorcerers are not vile. Where would we be, you or I, if not for Gandalf? And he's here with us, yes, you can see him in town, leading walking tours of Howard's haunts. He may answer to Rusty, but we know who he really is. There are other types of sorcerers. All sorcerers don't take the wand, or the staff, or the athame, or the chalice. Some, like Lovecraft and Howard, pick up the plume, or even a type machine. Others still, with names like Frazetta and Crinkle, Yashema, Windsor Smith, Wood, Imsh, Freeze, Bach, Brundage, and St. John, the artist brush. These grand sorcerers' art are calling us now from beyond. I think I'll turn my ringer off.
Okay, Weird Tales didn't really have... Oh, you okay.
Out of respect for the dear departed sorcerers of old. Where was I?
Yeah, you're calling us now.
Painter's brush.
Oh, yeah, the painters.
You're going to have to start from the beginning.
It's your fault. Tierney.
Painter's brush.
Yeah, that's not helping me.
Okay, well, we'll get
What,
we'll get back to you.
one thing that separates me from my dear fellow scribes is that I knew and worked with many of these people, many of these sorcerers of old that I have mentioned. I don't have a round of wine or mead to remember them with now, but I invite you, I implore you to join me in toasting them now with a round of applause.
Okay. Weird Tales really didn't have any illustrations up until 1924, and the first regular artist they had was Andrew Brundage. I guess that's how you pronounce it. And he was the first person to illustrate Howard with The Lost Race. And after Brundage, my notes here, an artist named Olenek took over. The cover was by C. Barker Petrie. The art in Weird Tales wasn't really very good for a while.
When they did the covers, were there times when the covers had nothing to do with what was on the inside? You know what I mean? It didn't illustrate anything in particular that was going on?
Usually it did.
Oh, it did? Okay.
Yeah, it would be, there would be a cover story.
Okay.
He knows the earliest ones better than I do. I'm most familiar with the ones with the St. John and the Brundage covers. And once Brundage came in, the critics would say, oh, her stuff was very sexy for the times. And the 30s were sexier than a lot of people realize. But hers was still pushing the envelope at all turns. And a lot of the people would write in letters. There were debates in the letters columns. And they'd say, oh, you're just selling the magazine with sex. And that's not really debated too much. I mean, they were, and it worked. St. John, this is my first St. John book, and those are very rare now. This one's better known. That was the drawings of St. John. This is the paintings of St. John. And that's a famous Weird Tales cover there. That was for Jack Williamson's story, Golden Blood. And St. John was doing fabulous. And this, if you wanted to look for an artist before Frazetta that was most comparable, I think this painting is one of the best things you could come up with. And Frazetta was influenced by St. John at a very early age. And then he kind of forgot St. John when he got turned on to Hal Foster through the Tarzan newspaper strip. And then later, when he met Krinkle, Krinkle reminded him of St. John, and it came ripping through his brain from his childhood that, yes, he had read the early Burroughs hardcovers with St. John, the illustrations that his uncle owned when he was a very young child. But back to the question of the connection to the storyline. Even on the Brundages, they tried to have a connection to the story, but I'd say that hers may seem less obviously connected sometimes than the others, because the editor, Farnsworth Wright, he knew that sex was helping to sell it, and that's what he's looking for. So it got to a point, and if a writer got their work on the cover, they did get a bonus. So the writers generally hoped that they would get the cover. That would, be quite a pat on their back and help to promote them as a writer, including hopes of work for other publications, and get that extra immediate bonus. And a lot of the writers, when they saw what was going on with the Brundage covers, they would, if they wouldn't have already, they would look to have at least one sexy scene in their story in hopes of getting the cover, because they knew if there was nothing romantic or sexy in there, their chances of getting cover was practically non-existent. Now, one guy who didn't want to play that game was Lovecraft. And Lovecraft was one of Brundage's top critics. He said her work is great, but it doesn't really represent weird fiction. They had come to be known in what they called the Unique magazine as weird fiction, as much as someone else would do. In fact, he said something along the lines of, I don't know what Mrs. Brundage's naked ladies have to do with weird fiction. And on my award-winning Brundage book, I have a series of quotes on the back cover, the likes of which you will not see on any other book. We have New York Times, Elsbreg de Camp, H.P. Lovecraft, Playboy Magazine, Walt Disney, Robert E. Howard, and Forrest J. Ackerman. Lovecraft says, the human figure is worthy a subject as any object of beauty, but I don't see what the hell Mrs. Brundage's undressed ladies have to do with weird fiction.
What did Disney say?
Sales.
Disney, this is from a letter from Disney to Brundage. Dear Margaret, I want to thank you and to tell you how much I enjoyed your visit. If you're ever out this way again, please call on us. Sincerely, Walt Disney. They went to high school together. Let me know when you're ready.
I'm ready.
You okay.
Okay, the first major
I'll
artist.
see you later.
First major artist for Weird Tales was Curtis Senf. I guess that's how you pronounce it. He was the main illustrator for several years, and frequently he did covers that didn't have anything to do with Howard, that had Howard in them. This is his first cover. This had Howard's Song of the Bats in it. And here's another. This one had another Howard poem in it, The Ride of Falumi, or yeah. And on and on. And finally, Howard got a cover, Red Shadows. This was the first Weird Tales Howard cover. But the interior illustration was by Hugh Rankin, who would soon become the favorite illustrator for the magazine. And he was Howard's favorite, too.
For interiors. Howard's favorite for covers was Brundage, but interiors was Rankin, for good reason.
Here's more Senef doing Howard stories. Gods of Balsaga, Footfalls Within, Thing on the Roof. This one is terrible. The one on the right, you can't really tell what's going on. It's a ghostly figure coming up. The reproduction in Weird Tales was not really great. Senef did some really highly stylized things like these covers here. These have nothing to do with Howard, but they're really interesting art, especially one on the right.
Quick question.
Sure.
Did the artist and the authors do any collaboration as far as what was drawn, or was it just what the editor wanted done?
Wright would ask for a cover, and he would want to see examples. He would want a rough done. And we have some good examples of that when we get to St. John.
I know that Brundage, they would send her full scripts, and then she would scan it for what she thought would make a good image. And then she would say to Wright, here's 2 or 3 scenes I think could be good for the cover, and then Wright would make the final decision of which of those. But so she was involved. I can't speak with as much detail and clarity on the other illustrators, but there would be reason to think that he probably worked that way with other illustrators as well.
And actually on Red Nails, when they sent the script, the artist did the cover painting and then lost the script. And so Farnsworth Wright is like, hey, Howard, you need to send me your carbon copies. Well, at that time, Howard was not doing it. So he had to rewrite the script right away, send it into Farnsworth Wright so he could have it typeset. After that, there were 2 major changes that happened in the way stories were done. They didn't send the whole script straight to the artist. They went to the typesetter first and then the artist for them. And Howard changed the way he did things, and that's why the Howard Library has so many type scripts, because he made sure to keep carbon copies of everything from that point on.
Mr. Tolan.
2 questions. One, how much of a bonus did the writers get if they got the cover?
I forget it off the top of my head, but I believe it's in the Brundage book.
I believe it was $10.
Yeah.
And also, are there reprints of Howard's Conan?
Does anyone want to estimate what $10 then equals today in today's economy?
In the
100.
1930s, 60% of American families were living on $20 a week.
Yeah, so that was a nice bonus.
Are there any collections of Howard stories or Howard's Conan stories reprinted with all the original Weird Tales interior art?
Yes. A company called Duracell did these massive volumes of Howard facsimiles. They're out of print and go for a couple of $100 a piece when you can find them. They're beautiful books. The Harp of Alfred was the only poem that had actually an illustration in Howard's early days with Weird Tales.
Now also in the art chronology, all the interior illustrations are also included in here, and the people who supported this on Kickstarter are also going to get a 3-book collection of all the Robert E. Howard Conan stories, which will also include the original art.
Can you open that up and show us an example of the size that they appear in there, please? In the average presentation?
Could you pick it up above your head there? Because we can't do that after.
And what book is that again?
This is the Robert E. Howard 100-year catalog archaeology, and it's kind of big and heavy, so it's a little bit difficult to handle. Flip a few pages here.
So, is there anything in particular that led you on when you decided what size that the illustrations would run? A particular percentage of the original, or just the way they look good in the book overall?
Look good in the book. It was just a design thing.
But you're saying every interior illustration is included?
I got them. Yeah, all of them. Yes.
Those are also in this book, which also has every Howard poem, in facsimile, that was in Weird Tales in the original curriculum. There are a lot of options for that.
What were the source of the material for the pictures? Like, where did you get the scans from?
These were scans from actual copies of Weird Tales magazine.
So nothing from the original art, though?
No, these were not scanned from original art. And one of the things I did in here on the art chronology, this wasn't where I tried to go back. Some art books will go back to original artwork. This is basically showing you what all the publications look like and, restored, like if you bought it brand new off the shelf today. So it's kind of like a time machine to see what these look like when they were coming out brand new.
I don't think a lot of that original art has survived. I know specifically on the Brundage, she did, I believe it was 66 covers, and out of those, only about 16 or 17 of them survived.
Yeah, the publishers didn't appreciate original art back then like they do now.
And that 16 or 17 were sold in one sale to a local bookstore by an employee who didn't necessarily have the authority to sell them.
Well, Wright would just also give the art away to people. It never made it back to the artist. And in fact, there's a story about this painting here in his book. Jack Williamson went to visit with St. John, and St. John had this painting and another one, and he asked Williamson if he wanted it. And he didn't have room for it. He was riding a bus that day, so he didn't take it with him. And a week later, he came back to try to pick those up from Wright, and Wright had just given them away to somebody. So.
And I believe that Williamson did recognize this later as a masterpiece, and he was sorry about missing out on it, for the rest of his life.
A lot of people consider that to maybe be the premier cover for Weird Tales.
Yeah, and that's one reason I put it as the cover on the. We had I regularly do a soft, a hard, and a deluxe. I like to put the most popular, most famous piece on the soft because that goes to the broadest audience. But I pick favorite pieces for others, like on the Brundage. This is the first ever original painting for Queen of the Black Coast. And Conan only appeared in approximately half of Brundage's Conan covers. All the original Conan covers were first produced by Brundage, but Conan was not a huge character, and the sex appeal was selling the magazine more than the character. So it happened to be that Conan himself only appeared on about half of Brundage's Conan-related covers. And so this is one of the top ones. And the one with the snake that he used on his cover, I would say, is the other. I would say these are the two top Brundage Conan paintings. Now, some people will question me when I refer to them as paintings because most of her Weird Tales covers were done in pastel, and they're not familiar with referring to dry media as paintings. I would beg to differ that this is an exception. If it were charcoal or some other dry media pencil, I would agree. I would call it a drawing. But when it comes to pastel, it is not unusual to refer to a fully rendered pastel color piece like that as a painting.
And this was the only one that actually showed the main character in a position of authority, like you would picture him in the story. He was always a submissive character on the other ones.
When
I
Wright
don't know
got,
if I would describe this one as submissive. There was one where
She's
he was
protected
behind,
him.
where he was behind bars.
Yeah. Then he was in chains, yeah.
I think we're jumping out of Dennis's chronology, though.
we already did that. When they got Brundage's art in, it was so fragile that the first thing they did was take it and shoot it, because you could breathe on a pastel and it would sometimes mess it up. This is the first cover she did of Conan, and this is probably the worst Conan ever until maybe Marcus Boaz started to draw.
My buddy Marcus, he'll be heartbroken.
But, Conan it looks like the skull is biting his leg. That is the wimpiest Conan you'll ever see. Here's another example of her. This is Conan without Conan. Shadows in Zambula.
And it looks pretty good. If you can't have Conan in your Conan, that's a pretty good one.
She did a lot better with the women than she did the men.
Yeah,
Her actual formal training was specifically for fashion illustration, and but when she was looking for work, she was looked in the phone book under publishers, and Weird Tales was there, so she went in there. And she started with Oriental Tales, which was another publication they did. And after a couple covers for Oriental Tales, they switched her to Weird Tales. But she got with the Weird program pretty quick. She was a broad-minded broad. And she got with the Weird program pretty quick.
Women weren't buying Weird Tales, were they?
I've seen some different data on there. Most people assumed it was...
Some women did. There was one of the most prolific letter writers to the Erie was Gertrude Hemken. There were others.
Well, yeah, the exception proves the rule, probably.
Maybe.
I mean, I think, wouldn't you think, what percentage would you say?
It's been assumed overall that it was vastly majority male readership, but I forget where I saw it, but I did see some data that discussed that, and that there was some evidence to show that it was a little higher than people expected on the female readership. But I don't remember what that percentage is at this point.
Another thing too, as you look at these covers, you'll notice the brightness of the colors and this and that. There's one word that always gets attached to any discussion of pulps, and usually in a derogatory manner, but it shouldn't be, and that's the word lurid, because the colors are so bright, the action's so descriptive, and so anytime somebody will try to slam out, they're always all those lurid covers, but hey, that made them sell, and that's why we still remember them today, because they really popped off, and they caught your eye.
I think that, did we see St. John yet? Did we
Not
see
yet,
St. John?
no.
Okay. I think this is, a beautiful cover,
Oh,
fabulous cover. And I would guess that by this point, we have direct quotes from Howard praising Brundage. And we have a couple there were only 2 interviews ever done with Brundage in her life that are known to exist. And we include both of them in the book. And she said, point blank, Howard was her favorite pulp author. And that when they got the news of Howard's passing, she spent all day at the office just sitting around, her and Farnsworth Wright and the other people getting the news, sitting around crying. I would think that by this cover, that Howard would have been definitely impressed by Brundage's work, despite the earlier wimpy, submissive, jailed Conan.
Well, Brundage lived in Chicago, and St. John was an art teacher in Chicago. It would have maybe been nice if she took some of his male figure drawing classes so she could do better with the muscle guys.
And then look at this beauty. This reminds me of what's the great illustrator Leyendecker. Can anyone see a similarity to Leyendecker there? It doesn't have that kind of line-ish technique that he used, but the colors, and there's a great rendering quality to it. I mean, it's eye candy. So yes, occasionally her anatomy I would definitely say that St. John is a better anatomist than Brundage. I would say in general his composition was probably better than Brundage too. Both of them had a unique flair of a romance. Hers leaned more toward sexuality, maybe more toward luridness. There were reasons why St. John became Edgar Rice Burroughs' favorite illustrator. Burroughs hired top illustrators, including N.C. Wyeth and Frank Schoonover. He preferred St. John because St. John got it. He got the fantasy. He got the heroic fantasy more than Wyeth or Schoonover did. And for a similar reason, Weird Tales, Weird Fiction, the unique magazine. Weird Tales is a very unique magazine, and Farnsworth Wright was looking for that unique quality, and he found it in Brundage, and it also evidently the readers did because the sales went up. But yes, I would say from a technical perspective, in many regards, including anatomy and composition, St. John was more consistent, if not more consistently, better from an academic standpoint.
Well, some of her color work was really stunning on a lot
There
of the covers.
is, this is one of the strange things about Brundage. You could have a dud, and then all of a sudden you'd have a masterpiece like this. This could be something out of ancient Egypt. This could be some kind of fetish art. This could be a Halloween costume party. It could be anything, but what it definitely is mysterious. What it definitely is come find out what this is about. Okay, and that's what you want on the cover of a magazine, particularly a unique magazine like Weird Tales. And I do, not only is this her most famous piece, but it is just, it's eternal to me. It's, there's a point where some pieces rise that are done as illustration, but they rise above illustration. There's an eternal quality to them that takes them out of illustration. They may still serve the purpose of illustration to sell the product, but they rise to a fine art level. And this is one where she was hitting on all cylinders. She's got some duds. Occasionally has some wonky anatomy, but I think the success and fame of that piece. I've seen that piece used as Santana concert posters for all kinds of things. It's an eternal image,
And
as
here's
is
another
this
woman
St.
reading-
John.
Here's another woman reading Weird Tales. It's Brundage, but
Some that's not Brundage.
oh, it's not.
No, it's not. It has been misidentified as Brundage frequently online, and you'll frequently find that online saying it is Brundage, but that is not Brundage.
Well, I
Whoever
did not
it
want
is,
to
she's
scan.
nice.
I didn't want to scan any of the photos out of your book because I don't want to flatten my copy of that book out on a scanner.
I was going to say you have special dispensation, but I respect your love of the books. We're all collectors here, so we can relate to that.
Well, Brundage did other magazines too. Golden Fleece, which also had some Howard material in it later in the 30s. But this will show you what happened with pastel originals. Let's see if I can find it here. They fade.
Well, also in the printing process, they tend to gain saturation through the printing process. So the original color would probably be somewhere about halfway between the way the original art looks now and the way it printed, because there's just something in the offset printing process that tends to get what they call press gain. The dot of ink hits the paper and it spreads a little bit, or it gets absorbed, and the color tends to get a little darker, a little more saturated through the printing process. And sometimes on purpose, the publishers would boost a color, usually red. They felt like stark red would help sell things, so frequently in the color separations, they would push the red plate a little bit. There were many old rumors about Brundage, and through my investigative research, a couple of people I gave what I call my short tour of the book over at the Pavilion. And I do the front of the book. I said, look at those few pages. That's everything ever known about the woman. And then we do every single one of her pulp covers in chronological order at full size, perfect copies, not dog-eared, not browned. And then we have 2 more articles, and then we stop it, even with a little bibliography. And then we go into another section, almost a book within a book, which is pure my investigative research and writing, called The Secret Life of Margaret Brundage, which is 3 times as much as the front. And I say that's everything never known about the woman. And in there, I addressed a lot of the old rumors. There were rumors that she had a teenage daughter that she forced to model nude for her Weird Tales covers. Well, she didn't have a daughter. She had a son, and but I found some discoveries, and one of those discoveries is I found out who her real model was. She did have a female model she tended to work with a lot, and that last image we had up was one of the best shots of that model, and in the book I unveil who that model really was.
Now we're going to talk about James Allen St. John. He was the first famous illustrator that went to work for the magazine. He was famous for Edgar Rice Burroughs books, and this is one of his finest works here. This is for At the Earth's Core.
Question. Weird Tales, did not pay as well as most other pulp magazines, for writing at least. How did they pay for covers to get artists like St. John, who I presume would be in fair demand?
That I don't know.
I don't remember specifically off the top of my head, but it should be in both my St. John book and the Brundage book. But I've heard that Weird Tales did pay. There were other pulps that paid worse than Weird Tales, but as time went on, they started getting slow in paying, and that was one of the problems with Howard. That technically he was getting a decent writing rate, but particularly toward the end, the checks were coming slower and slower.
St. John didn't really like to work for Weird Tales because they made him do rough sketches and rough paintings, and he wasn't used to that. Usually most publishers would just take whatever he sent, and they were happy to get it. And here is his only Howard cover, The Fire of Assurbanipal.
Let's hold that for just a second. If you look at that, this is a good comparison of the printed version and the original art. That painting still exists, and luckily we have a good shot of the original art there. So you can see some of the muddiness that appears in the smoke on the left on the printed version may be, it's either part of the gaining, the press gain that I mentioned earlier. That could be enough to contribute to that muddiness. But also, as I said, a lot of publishers would tend to punch the red plate, and that would do it too, because all of that muddiness is all going toward the warm, and you lose all the subtleties that he had in his cool shadows up in here. And it also, it kind of exaggerated things. A little bit of slightly green reflection over here on the skeleton turns into an exaggerated green reflection over there. So some things, the publisher thought they were improving it, and some things worked, some things didn't work. But it's nice that we still have that painting in existence. And I really, really wish that St. John had an opportunity to do more Howard paintings.
He was a perfect match. In 1932, they hired him to do illustrations and covers for a Buccaneers of Venus by Otis Adelbert Klein. And if you're going to do an imitation Edgar Rice Burroughs story, why not pick the best Burroughs artist to do the work? This particular issue also had Worms of the Earth in it, and that's by an artist, J.M. Wilcox, who was one of the better interior illustrators for Howard's work.
That was one of the first That one and this one were two of the first Weird Tales I ever picked up, and I had access to pick up some others, but it was the quality of those covers that definitely inspired me to buy those two issues.
And this St. John cover is the cover of the first Conan story. It's not for the Conan story, The Phoenix and the Sword, and that is also by J.M. Wilcox. And that's what Conan looked like at first.
A lot of the artists, they couldn't wrap their heads around the barbarian character, and the closest idea they could come up with was like a Roman. And so a lot of the early depictions of Conan, he looked largely like a Roman. And that even continued from the 30s into the 40s and 50s with the Gnome Press hardcovers. You still get some very nice illustrations.
Gladiators.
He's still looking like a Roman soldier, a Roman gladiator to a large extent.
And he's double too, huh?
Yeah, yeah. And one exception to that is the Kelly Freeze. And Kelly was a dear friend of mine. He did one of the Gnome Press covers, and the background was so dark, it's kind of hard to tell exactly where the hair stops and starts. But that Conan's a little wilder. He's, the Roman garb looks much more civilized than the Kelly Freeze version. And the Wallace Wood cover for Gnome Press, I've seen the layout for that piece, and the Conan Wood was a Howard fan, and he knew Conan, and the layout is wilder, more untamed, more barbaric, and it's almost as if the editor or art director asked him to tone it down. Maybe they thought it would sell better, and Victor Mature was a very popular actor at the time, and he did the Samson movie and played some other kind of sword and sandal type roles. So that final Wood version looks kind of like Victor Mature. And I wouldn't be surprised if the editor or art director didn't say, give us something like Victor Mature as Samson.
One question. Can you go one picture back about the interior illustrations? Because one thing that strikes me, exactly that one, is that many of these interior illustrations were major spoilers. I mean, these interior illustrations give a lot away from the stories. Were there ever any complaints? I scanned through a lot of details letters, but I never actually saw anyone complaining. But do you know anything about it? Or did, for example, obviously Virgil didn't say, Farnsworth Wright didn't say anything about it, but was there something like complaints or reactions about concerning these spoilers?
I don't know off the top of my head, but the first place I would go with that question would be to check the letters pages.
Yeah, I did that actually.
But they wouldn't necessarily publish. They wouldn't necessarily. That's a subject that it might make Farnsworth Wright say to the illustrator, that's not a good scene, or figure out when he suggests saying to the illustrator what scene he thinks is good, his choice, but not necessarily, unfortunately, something they would publish, even if they got those letters.
Well, this is an example.
Howard thought of how they depicted Conan in the illustrations?
Well, Howard liked Rankin. He liked Rankin's interpretation.
Unlike Lovecraft would tend to be more critical. I think Howard, his solution was to say what he liked. He liked Rankin for the inside, he liked Brundage for the outside. And I think part of him focusing on the positive there was because he also liked those cover bonuses. And most people agree that the Clark Axon Smith also made changes to his stories in hopes of cover bonuses too. But not Lovecraft.
Here's an example of the rough art that they had to do to show right for the covers. The rough for this is almost as good as the finished art. And he never got any of this stuff back, right?
That's ridiculous. If you did that much work, you might as well just finish it, on the same surface and turn it in.
Here are some examples of St. John's interior work. course, the reproduction in Weird Tales was terrible.
That last was one of my favorites. Oh, that's a great one too, the tiger and the snake.
He specialized in tigers.
Yeah.
This is the original on the left and how it was printed on the right.
Press game.
This is the logo for Magic Carpet that St. John did this logo.
Are these originals in your books?
They're shot from originals. I don't own them, but
Well, I mean, are the roughs, did you get them into the books, or did you just have the covers?
I'm sorry, what?
I apologize. In your books, did you get the roughs in there, or did you get just the covers?
Did you ever run that rough you just showed of Golden Blood?
Not yet.
I didn't run that. We've got all kinds of originals in this St. John book, but we did not have access to that rough at the time that we did that book. Have you seen other roughs? St. John
Some.
roughs for
For interiors, yeah. He did logos for a lot of magazines, and of course, this is the companion to Weird Tales Magic Carpet. That's just a St. John original. He really specialized in tigers. A friend of mine owned this one. Did this. It's just
I love that.
detail.
That one too. That creature is fabulous.
Picture of him posing with one of his most famous Tarzan paintings, Tarzan and the Golden Lion. St. John was 6.5 feet tall. There are pictures of him with his students, and he towers above everybody. Now, he did this logo, the famous Weird Tales logo. It's by St. John, but he also did the one on top, an earlier version of the logo, and it looks like it's just a type font, but it's actually hand painted by St. John.
He used to paint directly on the lettering, the type treatment, directly on the original. And he did try to get his originals back. A lot of illustrators didn't. They were just after the paycheck. But St. John did try to get his originals back, and frequently when he got them back, he would then paint the type out because he wanted something that was more of a fine art piece, and as long as the type was on there, it was blatantly commercial.
When he sold the originals to collectors, they requested that he paint out the lettering. When A.C. McClurg Publishers shut down in the late 40s, someone called him up and said, we're shutting down, there's no one around, and the safe is open that contains all your originals. You might want to go by there. So he went by and he loaded a taxi up with some of his original art from Burroughs and others, and he made 10 trips in cabs, and on the next trip the safe was finally locked. So someone there actually gave him his originals back. It was just sort of shady.
He lucked out. I've heard of artists that had galleries, and a lot of gallerists will skip town. They'll have a big show. They'll take the money, not pay the artist, and then skip town, take art with them. And I've had artists tell me where they'd get a mysterious call in the middle of the night saying, you better go get your originals out of that gallery immediately.
And he was tempted to take other artists' work out because there were some that would be worth a fortune, even in the, when it happened in the 40s. Here's another original in the reproduction. This original was very badly damaged. The friend of mine owned this for a while and had it restored, and I don't know what that means. I don't know if someone else painted over part of it.
That could mean various things. It could mean removing some of the soot. Some of it could be touched up with paint. Some is removing things. If you want to restore it, just make sure you get a good one.
This is an artist named Harold DeLay, and he was one of the better interior artists that did Howard work. This is Black Romeo's Vengeance. Sorry, I have it's a double-page spread, and I have it It's too, I ran out of time making all these scans. He also did other work. He was good at covers and interiors.
Very good.
This appeared in Golden Fleece magazine. Actually, Golden Fleece had 2 Howard stories, Howard historicals, 3 or 4 years after he died. 2 years, sorry. And DeLay was the chief illustrator for that magazine. There's another Howard cover.
So how did you guys get interested in this? Are you artists yourselves, or how did that start?
I worked as an illustrator for many years. I was also president of the Dallas Society of Illustrators for some years in the early 90s. I moved to the New York area in the mid-90s. And then I gradually started shifting to writing about art and publishing more than producing original works.
I'm just a fan and collector. And here's another Howard cover by DeLay.
He's humble. He's been writing about Howard for 50 years. This is his anniversary. Give him a round of applause.
DeLay did other stuff after he worked for Pulps. He worked for comics.
Who worked in comics?
Harold DeLay. There was life after comics. This is his artwork for Black Canaan. This is,
That one got reprinted in Savage Tales
I believe this is from
by
Howard
Marvel.
Dragon.
We might have the author of that article back here somewhere. Some of these, you know, some of these would get, they do articles in Marvel Savage Tales magazine or Savage Sword of Conan. And some of these got reprinted there. So a lot of people, that's the first time they saw them that were too young to have access to the Weird Tales.
Yes, and the man that wrote a lot of those articles is in the
That's what I'm
audience,
saying.
Fred
He's right
Wasser.
over here. That's Red Nails.
This is, I think this is,
Like Hounds of Death.
yeah. He did some covers for, he left Weird Tales for a while and came back in the late 30s, and this is the cover. It's not a Howard cover, but this is the first issue of Almeric serialization.
He really liked alternating that warm light on one side and cool light on the other. This one doesn't work quite as well for me as some of the earlier ones.
Oh, this was reprinted. When Weird Tales ran out of money in the 50s, they started to recycle some of their stories and their covers. Got some good examples of that later here.
There was one that they reprinted of Brundage. It was actually one of the last new ones she did for him after they moved to New York. After they moved from Chicago to New York, they started phasing her out. There were actually laws passed to keep Brundage style art off the newsstands, including in New York City. You would think the larger, more cosmopolitan city would be more liberal, but it wasn't necessarily the case. And so there were multiple things that affected them taking fewer Brundage pieces once they moved to New York. And at that point, Bach starts coming in bigger.
Actually, the New York legislature passed 2 different bills that were going to severely restrict what could be shown on the newsstands, and both in comic books and in pulps. And in both cases, they were vetoed by the governor, Dewey. Now, this was after he'd lost his election to Truman. So if Truman hadn't beaten him, who knows what kind of censorship would have been passed on laws in New York. But since he lost that election, he was there to veto both those bills.
One politician had Spices taken off the stands.
Yeah, no, there were laws passed to take this stuff off the stands. I think LaGuardia was governor in New York when some of that was passed, and believe me, Brundage was, and the Spiceys. The Spiceys, in a way,
It was mayor.
yeah, he was mayor, right, governor. Sorry,
Yeah,
when LaGuardia was mayor of New York City.
Yeah, the two bills that Dewey got knocked out caused them to say, hey, it's Superman in disguise, referring to Dewey.
This one is Virgil Finley, and Finley came along right about the time Howard died, and he became one of their most important illustrators, and one of the most important illustrators in science fiction and fantasy. He did a lot of his first work was in Weird Tales. This might be his first published illustration here.
I know people who consider Virgil Finley the top science fiction illustrator of all time.
You mentioned that some of the art was reused for the covers. Did the artists get paid again for any of that, or no?
Reprints? No, they did not get paid for reprints. Howard didn't get, well, of course he was dead, but none of the writers got. And here's a rough for a Weird Tales cover by Finley.
Did you ever show the rough of the Golden Blood, of the St. John Golden Blood cover?
Yeah.
You did. Okay.
Yeah, we talked about it. I compared the change of the color in the printed version and the original. Got the shadows, he had cool shadows in the printed version, became very warm.
This is one of the reprints.
That's the Brundage reprint, yeah.
The reprints on the right.
Yes.
Yep.
Oh, here's a Finley illustration for Almeric. Another Howard. I think Howard would have really liked Finley. This is from Pigeons from Hell.
Finley was also extremely prolific. Very glamorous. The word glamour comes to my mind when I see this type of work from him. It's, it's almost like Hollywood beauty queens, but he did mix it to turn it into a science fiction piece.
He actually worked from posed pictures of starlets at the time. You should do some Finley books.
There's been talk, but there's been so much black and white Finley reprints. The talk leaned toward trying to do finally a real collection of Finley color pieces, which are very rare. It's very cost effective reprinting black and white, and a lot of Finley shoots his line art, which is easy to reproduce. But the Finley color originals are much harder to get access to, and so nobody's really done a really good color Finley collection.
Weird Tales printing didn't really do Finley justice.
Right.
This is from Almeric. So is this. You can hardly tell what's going on here. This is one of my favorite Finley pieces, cover for Weird Tales. This is for a later issue.
So one thing here is you can look at illustration. You've got, do you have good composition? Do you have good storytelling? Do you have good anatomy? Do you have good perspective? That works in any kind of illustration, any kind of artwork. But this is an example where you start to really see that they have a unique feel for the subject matter. We're talking about, weird fiction and for the unique magazine. And I think that this one really speaks to, that Finley has dimensions inside of him that most illustrators don't have, and he was able to produce it for us to enjoy in this piece.
Definitely weird. This is a rough. We pulled that off the Heritage auction site.
what the total number of Finley covers is for Weird Tales? I think Brundage has a record at 66.
Yeah. Well, here's a Finley reprint. This was made, I think this on the right was the last issue of Weird Tales.
The reprint does include a Robert E. Howard story.
Hans Bach. Bach never illustrated a Howard story. I don't think he did. But he was one of the best weird artists for the magazine.
He did do the cover for the Skullface Omnibus.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little about Hannes Bach while we're watching this?
Well, no.
I not biographically. I'm not that well versed in his bio, but as far as his art go, it's kind of like he took the color palette and some of the technique from Maxfield Parrish and took it as far as he could into the science fiction and fantasy direction. You know, he created, you know, very interesting characters and exaggerated things, but he was very influenced by Maxfield Parrish.
He did have his first
technique-wise.
Weird Tales was his first sale, his first published art. His real name was Wayne Francis Woodland. And he took his name from the composer Bach.
Was there a reason he used the pseudonym?
His original name was too boring. He's trying to, it's more memorable. It's like Imshmiller shortening his name to Imsh. It's easier to remember.
And sometimes artists and writers, they're ashamed maybe of what they're doing when they're working in the science fiction and fantasy field. It's like Stan Lee. His real name was Stanley Lieber. And so he wrote comics under Stan Lee because he wanted to save Stanley Lieber for whenever he wrote the great American novel, which never happened. Then finally just said, hey, I'm so well known as Stan Lee, he legally changed his name.
Bobby just reminded me that our time is up. We're over time.
Is there someone coming in after us?
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's different.
When you're having
Is
fun.
everybody in the back waiting for the next panel? All right, we're out of here. Hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you, everybody.